Jesus, draw me ever nearer as I labor through the storm. You have called me to this passage, and I'll follow though I'm worn. May this journey bring a blessing. May I rise on wings of faith at the end of my heart's testing. With your likeness, let me wait.
Well, the reason I chose that song was that really is the opposite end of what we're talking about, the pathway to death. Um, this is the cry of one who wants to be closer to God, further from the devil. I hope that would be the plea of each one of us who are studying the Bible together today. Thank you for joining us. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, but exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. We are talking about, as I mentioned, the subject of the pathway to death. That may sound very dark and drear to you, and it is, but it's something that all of us need to consider. The Bible warns us about sin. We saw this in particular in James chapter 1, verses 13 through 16. And that really is the sole verse. If I had to take one verse from all of our studies, that would be the one that is the pathway to death. And we went over that quite a bit last time, probably refer to it again today. So in thinking about the pathway to death, we've gone over some terms in the Bible. For example, desire, that which God has placed within us naturally. We've also looked at the idea of temptation, where instead of satisfying God-given desires in a God-given way, the devil gives us alternative ways to circumvent God's law. And of course, we transgress God's law when we take Satan's way to do that. Then we looked at the idea of lust, asalgia, that word, how it's used in both a negative and a positive way in the Bible. The negative way is what we're concerned about in the pathway to death, and how we can not just desire, but so strongly desire something that we begin to make plans. We're actively entertaining thoughts about how we would carry out this improper action. And James in James 1 says that when we do that, we begin that process of the pathway to death. And he says that when we're tempted, we're drawn away by our own desires or lusts and enticed. Enticed means entrapped. So that's how that process works. And then he says when desire has conceived, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. So we don't want to go down this path for sure. I have one more item that I want to talk about in that path, and then I want us to talk about in a subsequent study how we can avoid the path, or take an alternative path if we see we've started down it. Today, though, I want us to look at one more item in this path, and that is the idea of lewdness. Now, if you're like me and you cut your teeth on the King James Version of the Bible, you'll be familiar with a word that that others will not, and that word is lasciviousness. Not very easy to say, even harder to write. Lascivioussness. Long, difficult word, lasciviousness. Not used in modern day speech at all. It's really now an archaic term because other words have taken its place. Probably not many of you use the Revised Standard Version, but when it came out, it was popular. And in the Revised Standard Version, lasciviousness was translated, at least sometimes, licentiousness. Also a difficult word, and not one that is used very much in modern day lingo. That's the equivalent of lasciviousness. King James Version is lasciviousness. Revised Standard Version would be licentiousness. If you're reading the New King James Version, which is what I typically use in these studies, it will be translated the word lewdness, lewdness, lewdness. Okay. The original Greek word is the word asalgia, and so that's the word that we want to explore today. I think I may have incorrectly given that word when I was talking about lust. The Greek word for lust is epithumia. The word we're looking at today is going to be lewdness, asalgia. It occurs just 10 times in the New Testament, so not a prolific writing about it. The idea probably comes up more than that. And so I want to give you an example, a couple passages. Well, really, I want us to look primarily at this one passage from 2 Peter chapter 2. There's 2 verses there that I want to make reference to. That this word is used, and it's translated into English differently in these 2 verses. So let's go over to 2 Peter chapter 2 and take a look at how this word is used. First of all, I want us to start, we'll start in verse 4 so we can have some context. If God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes. Now, you remember Sodom and Gomorrah. This is the cities that, as the angels came through and talked to Abraham, they revealed to him that God was going to destroy Sodom. So that's when Abraham began to bargain with God and ask if there were just so many righteous souls, would God spare the city? And those souls weren't found, and so God did destroy the city, but he allowed the angels to warn Lot and his family and get them out of the city before the destruction took place. So back to verse 6, turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. Now, I want you to notice here in verse 7, this phrase, filthy conduct. The word filthy is the word asalgia. That is the word that is translated in it's also translated in the New King James, lewdness. This is filthy conduct this time. If I go down to verse 18, you'll notice there, it's talking about these false teachers. He says, when they speak great swelling words of emptiness, they allure through the lust of the flesh, through lewdness, the ones who have actually escaped from those who live in error. If you're reading the New American Standard, it probably says something like those who have barely escaped. But notice this: they allure through the lust of the flesh, through lewdness. And lewdness is that word, aselgeia, that we're looking at. That's the same word in the King James as lasciviousness, in the Revised Standard, licentiousness, and in the New King James, lewdness, or as we saw back in verse 7, filthy conduct. You kind of get an idea, don't you, of what this word is. But let me talk to you about it just a little bit, because when we're talking about the path leading to death, this idea of lewdness, lasciviousness, really comes to bear on that path. If I could, I would bring up Vines for you. I'm having trouble. It's in a completely different program, and this software that I'm using doesn't want to bring it up. So take my word for it right now. Look it up in Vines for yourself later. In Vines, this word, aselgeia, he talks about how it denotes excess. And that's really what it is. It means undisciplined and unrestrained. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but that's the nature of sin. I remember when homosexuality started gaining ground in our country. When I was young, homosexuality was looked down upon, as it should be, because it's condemned in the Bible. I'm not saying we should look down on homosexuals. I'm saying we should look down on homosexual behavior. The people are fine. It's their actions that are condemned. The people need to be taught and told that what they're engaging in is sin, and it's no different than the sin that I would be engaging in as a heterosexual male. If I'm engaged in lying, I'm just as lost as the homosexual who's engaged in homosexual behavior. So it's no different, but it needs to be pointed out. But I don't know if you've noticed, once that began to be accepted and the movement started, it just got more and more vulgar, until you have not just people who want to live quietly as homosexuals anymore. You have now these gay parades, Gay Day at Disney World. You've got these homosexual parades like, around the time of Mardi Gras down in New Orleans. And people are barely dressed or not dressed, with piercings in places that I don't want to know about. And it just, that slippery slope of sin just continues to get worse and worse. That's what this idea of lasciviousness, lewdness is. It's unrestrained, undisciplined behavior. And that's the nature of sin. When we start down that road, that's where we go. It's condemned. It's just used 10 times in the New Testament, this original Greek word. But it's used in several different contexts. For example, it's one of the works of the flesh that's mentioned in Galatians 5, verse 19. The works of the flesh will condemn us. It is one of the things that we read about in Ephesians 4 and verse 19 about those who are engaged in sin, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. Peter talks about those in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 3. He says, we've spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lewdness and lust and drunkenness and revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. So these are the kinds of passages that talk about this idea of lasciviousness. I would say, if I was talking to someone about this, that it's when a person continues to sin and they no longer feel guilty about it. After time, they no longer care what God thinks of their deeds or what he has to say about the consequences of such. Since one of the words that's used is licentiousness, one of the ways you can remember this is license. What we do is we think we have a license to sin. And while not specifically restricted to sexual sins, many times this word is related to sexual sins. And the desire is so strong in man that it quickly ensnares him. So, in this pathway leading to death, this is a dangerous part of that pathway where we've allowed our desires to be piqued, and temptation has come along, and we lust for that. We begin to actively make plans until we commit sin, and then that lascivious, that lewd behavior makes us no longer even consider getting out of the sin, and we are ensnared and trapped. So let's talk about in our next study how we can avoid this, or how we can get off this path if we've started down it. Would always love to talk about the love of God and the rewards of righteousness and that, but make no mistake about it, there is just as much information in the New Testament to warn us against sin. So let's continue to think about that as well. In ending, we always want to ask you to send your comments and questions to us. If you have comments today, leave them on Facebook or on YouTube. Also want to mention that all of these are being made available on the church's website, stoneridgechurchofchrist.com. You can link to these right from our website. So there's a lot of ways that you can get here now. Use Facebook Messenger if you'd like to send a message that way, or send an email to us, to me personally or to the church here. Be glad to talk to you more about that. We always want to invite you to the assemblies of the church here, Sundays 10, 11, and 6, and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. You will always be an honored guest. You will always be treated respectfully, and we will do our best to share with you the things that we can from the Bible. And if we say anything that's untoward or out of the way, you'll be our friend to correct us in that. Hey, until next time, if the Lord allows us to live and gives us another opportunity, I hope that you'll have a great day and that you'll choose to draw nearer to God, because if we don't, the devil will draw us farther and farther away.
Jesus, guide me.